Hey, welcome back everybody to our live stream adventure outline, where we are writing a D&D adventure in real time, step by step, walking our way through the process and of how I approach this and how I organize this, and we come up with ideas and build out from those. So last time, we retouched on our adventure template, and then we spent some time talking about building the villains for our adventure. In each case, they're a coven of hags, the Bloodgood sisters, and so today we are going to get started writing the actual plot of this adventure. What happens? What happens when? So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into our Notion template here. So just to recap, we are writing an adventure where the characters are hired by a community leader of some kind to recover the only known deposit of our MacGuffin, cold iron, which was lost in a glacial mine once ravaged by disease. We figured all this out during our brainstorming session in the first part of this. The community needs it to save themselves from the foretold coming of a hag coven, which we have now named as the Bloodgood Sisters, at least temporarily. And they have been led to believe that the village plans to fight these powerful fae, but when they recover the cold iron. But as it turns out, the village actually intends to use the cold iron to pay off this coven, thus completing their ancient pact. The party is going to end up with a decision of whether or not to support empowering this evil coven with fae slaying cold iron, or to convince the community to fight back, knowing that there is going to be consequences for the world at large and the people that they meet in the adventure either way. So, we dug into our villains last time because we identified this as a villain based adventure, meaning that the action of this adventure is driven by the motivations and and of the actions of the main villain, our big bad evil guy, our BBEG. And so we spent some time sort of sketching out their wants, so their objectives, their motivation, their misbeliefs, so we can understand this coven and why they do what they do. And with that information, use it to inform what they do throughout this adventure. So now we're going to jump into actually working on the plot. Now, let me preface this by saying that plotting a D&D adventure, working through this, is not going to be a linear process. We're going to do a lot of work a little here, jump into another location as we figure out we need more information, jump back. So there's going to be a lot of back and forth in this, and that's natural. That's part of the creative process here. When we're coming up with ideas and really trying to dig into what's different and creative and new about this, playing around is the best thing that we can do. Creativity blossoms from play. Now, product blossoms from productivity, right? So we want to make sure we're blending the two, playing around and then producing a playable adventure as we move through this. So without further ado, let's get started. All right. So for this adventure and for any adventure, we're going to use the basic Freitag's pyramid model. Now, you've probably heard of things like the five-room dungeon. You may have heard of other models like the hero's journey, but they all follow this basic structure where the story begins with exposition, meaning this tells us what the world is like when the story starts and then tells us what changes to propel the characters into action. Rising action is the core of our story here, and that's where our players go through their puzzles and their setbacks and their trials and their tribulations. Climax is our final encounter where the decision is made, the story objective, meaning do the players succeed or fail in their objective of the story? And then our falling action is where the world starts to move back to its new status quo, and resolution is the identification of that status quo. So we're going to start this with the five-room dungeon model, which takes 5 steps, as you might imagine, each that follow a specific component of this pyramid. So those are the entry, the puzzle, the setback, the big bad evil guy, and then the reward. And so our entry is our exposition, puzzle and setback are our rising action, big bad evil guy is our climax, and then our reward is both our following action and our resolution. Because in a D&D adventure, we don't need as much to fill out this back end. um, as we do for the rest, since much of the back end is going to be a result of what happens in the climax here. So let's go ahead and start fleshing this out. So we're beginning here. We've got for our first, I'm going to say this is going to be our entry, and our stage is our exposition. So this is where we're gonna set the story, where the players are gonna be introduced to the situation and be given the opportunity to engage. I.e., this is where our hook will be, where our patron will give our quest. All right. So step 2 will either be our puzzle or our setback. Now, traditionally, in something like the 5-room dungeon, they start with the setback, or I'm sorry, they start with a puzzle. I prefer to start with the setback. That's just a personal preference. You can do either way in this. Um, but something that I want to point out here is that while we're following this 5-room dungeon model, really following Freitag's pyramid here, and we're not thinking of these as specific rooms. So, for example, entry will not be the entry into our glacial mine. It will not be how the players get into that. It's how they will learn about this adventure and get thrust into the adventure itself. Likewise, our setback will likely not be in the mine itself. It won't be a specific room in there. It will be getting there, or it will be getting inside, or it will be some event that happens. Right. Same with our puzzle, our conflict, our confrontation with our big bad evil guy, and then of course the reward. So don't think of these as specific physical places in your story. These are not numbered rooms or areas. These are story events. For example, in this adventure, we have this fixed dungeon, this glacial mine, but our big bad is really outside of that. They're not in the mine. They're going to come confront the town. There are our hags, and so in this case, our mine is just one of these 5 rooms. The whole mine, the whole dungeon will be one of these 5 rooms, and probably the puzzle is kind of how I have this ideated. And we'll talk about why that is in a little bit here. So let's just go ahead and get this marked up here. So setback is going to be an element of rising action. And our puzzle is another element of rising action. And our BBEG, big bad evil guy, our villain, is our climax. And of course, we have our reward, which is at the end here. And that is going to be our resolution. All right. There's all kinds of other models you can use. There's 3-act or 4-act structures for dungeons. Again, if you really look at them, they follow this same pyramid. They just divide it up into different chunks. For example, the 3-act and 4-act structures prioritize dividing this up based off of disasters, which are effectively when major things happen in the story. And if that helps you, you can segment it that way as well. We're going to find that no matter what structure we follow, it's going to get broken up pretty much that same way. All right. So with this in mind, let's go ahead and get started. We know where our story begins. We don't necessarily know a whole lot about that yet, but we know where it begins. They're given this quest by some, as of yet, unnamed community leader. And we know the climax, this confrontation with the Bloodgood sisters, the end, which is really useful information because it's going to give us our arc to get here. We probably know that our dungeon is going to be our puzzle. And again, we're using puzzle loosely here. This isn't necessarily like a puzzle door or a riddle that needs to be solved, but it's a place where characters have to make complex decisions and inferences to solve a larger need, i.e., finding our MacGuffin inside this dungeon. Which means our setback is probably going to be something between getting our mission, getting our quest, and arriving at our dungeon. So maybe something on the way. We'll dig into that. And then our reward is going to be our resolution. What plays out, what happens after our climax, our final decision here. So we're going to jump around this as we see fit. We'll fill this out with what we know. So let's go ahead and start with entry here, because we know where this starts. Now, again, for this sort of thing, you only need to make what notes you need to remember what happens in each step here. So I'm going to write a lot of this in long form so that you can understand my train of thought because, frankly, I tend to jump dots when I'm thinking this kind of stuff up on my own. Um, but but you don't need to write this out long form. You can do this as a bullet pointed list, a numbered list. This happens, then this happens, this happens, that kind of thing. But we need to have the same kind of elements here. So we need to have a place where let's go ahead and get a first heading here, where we set the stage. And this is where, what is the world like when our story opens? Now, if you're writing this as a continuation onto a previous adventure, so this is already done for you in the resolution of the previous adventure. You know what's going on in the world at that point, unless there's a major time leap. For example, if one adventure ends and there's a year later, and now we're moving into the next one. Yeah, okay, we still will have to do some work for this. But since we're starting with scratch here, we don't really have, our players won't have any idea what's going on in the world here. And so this is where we're going to kind of give a description of this community, of where the players are and what they're doing. So this is your typical, you all are at an inn, or you're all in a tavern, and that works just fine here if you want to do that. Right now, we're in players, so characters. Let's be specific here. The characters are in, let's see, TK, town, and currently at loose ends. Always good to start an adventure when the characters don't have anything better to do. And so we can spend some time detailing out the town here if we want. At this point, usually filling in the starting town details, I'll go back at the end and do that, or midway through, whenever it becomes more important to the narrative. Because truly, at the beginning of this, unless the story is going to take place in this town, there isn't a lot of need to sort of understand it just yet. So we'll kind of leave this here for the moment, but I will put some placeholder text in where we'll say sensory details. When I am creating a place in a campaign, I like to write out for myself 3 specific sensory details, stuff that the players see, smell, and hear, sort of out and around in that general vicinity, as specifically as I can, for a number of reasons. One, that helps get sort of the mood of this place clear in my head. And it also gives me some tangible things to come back to when I'm running the adventure. So you sit down and you start telling the story for your players. There's a lot of stuff to keep in your head. Now you can come back and go, okay, well, this town, is, you can see that the docks are packed with people and there's pickpockets that are moving through. You watch a team of urchins, distract a sailor while another one slits his purse. The other one collects the gold and passes it off to a fourth. This gives you a very clear idea of what kind of place this is, and gives your players that same kind of sense. You're using these to give impressions of the thing. Impressions are really powerful in writing this. You don't need to paint someone. You don't need to take a photo for someone. You want to paint a picture for someone where they can use their own imagination to impress the details upon it. So starting this town, we know at the very minimum, we'll build this out, that there's going to be some anxiety. There's, let's say something along the lines of, though the streets are full of people going about their business, the typical hubbub of civilization is uncomfortably absent. There's a tangible tension in the air that you feel every time someone refuses to meet your gaze. And so just something that's a sentence or two, just kind of like this, that gives us the vibe. We'll plug in here. So yeah, through the street, though the streets are full of people going about their business, the typical hubbub of civilization is uncomfortably absent. There's a tangible tension in the air that you feel every time someone refuses to meet your gaze. And so we give a sense of a feeling here, and then we give I don't want to say tangible action again, because we already used the word tangible here, but we give a clearly visible action, something that your players can see happening in their mind's eye. And we'll go back and we'll polish this before we present this to anybody, or maybe we'll just leave it the way it is. But this gives us a sense of the place that we're dealing with is under some strain, which is useful here because they need the adventurers to go do something. All right, and what that is, let's go ahead and outline that now since we know that. So let's say getting the quest. One thing I will say at this point too is as I go through this, I do a lot of these sort of very obvious headings to kind of cue myself into what's happening at this moment. When I get closer to the end of the adventure and I have a good understanding and a feel for what's going on, I will sometimes come back and change these headings to things that are a little more playful, that are a little more evocative of the situation. I might change setting the stage to a town in dire straits, or something a little more noir, just so that when I'm playing this through, I, as the DM, am cued into the emotion of what's happening here, because that emotion is what's going to propel the story forward for your players. It's going to keep them engaged. Almost anything can happen, so long as it moves the story forward by providing some sort of emotional change. All right, that's getting a little bit in the weeds here. So let's get back on course. So getting the quest. So we know the characters are approached by TK community leader and asked to seek out a lost glacial mine. TK mine name. In order to recover a powerful magical material known, we don't need a comma there, known as cold iron. The TK, or the town, has come under, has attracted the attention of a hag coven, and the community needs this powerful anti-fey material to deal with the threat. Cool. So this kind of gives me a summary of what is being pitched to the characters. Now, when I am writing this, especially for the beginning and the end of adventures, I will frequently put in written published adventure where it's a box of text that you're supposed to read aloud or paraphrase. I don't necessarily worry about putting that throughout my adventure, but I like to have that written at the very beginning and at the very end because those tend to be crucial moments where very specific things need to be said to your players, and it keeps me from forgetting any of the information. And it also gives me some time to sort of think about how I'm going to set the stage before we get to the game, and, and give me a place where that's all written out so I don't have to worry about remembering it. I can just read it off. Um, Now, I don't write those right away, but I will usually put a placeholder in there for them. And that's just that forward slash, and I use a call out box on Notion. And you can, if you want a different icon for it, you can change what's here. I like the little speech bubble, just cues me. So I'm just going to write TBD in there. We'll figure that out. So we get, what their pitch is going to be. We've got a little place to put our own little text, what we're going to tell our players about that. And then I'll write something that's more to myself here as a DM. And I'll say, in reality, we'll say, though TK community leader leads the characters to believe the community let's say the town intends to oppose the hags. They really need the wow, I can't type today. All right, they really need the cold iron to pay them off. All right. Pay them off, i.e., honor the town's years old, centuries old pact. Cool. So yeah, so separating the information between what I'm going to tell my players and then what I'm actually going to know as the DM here is vital. I used to kind of weave all that kind of stuff together when I was running this, and I found that when I was sort of in the heat of the moment playing, I would sometimes just kind of read through that to give them a quick summary, and I'd end up telling them everything. And now they'd have all this inside detail that they didn't have yet, they weren't going to have yet, and it just kind of ruins the whole adventure. And you get players that are kind of game, and they're like, okay, we aren't supposed to know that. We'll pretend we don't know that, but it changes the whole dynamic. So segmenting that out for yourself here is a key step. Now you'll notice that I don't have a lot of detail yet because we don't know a lot of what's going on here yet. We haven't kind of figured that out. And that's okay. We're going to come back and fill this out and flesh it out and change things as we progress. We're just getting what we know down on paper in a format that we can start editing. It is tempting to kind of leave all this unsaid because it's up here. We've already established that elsewhere. I understand it. I know what's going on. And the problem with that is that there is a finite amount of instantly accessible space up here, whereas there is not in your written text. So, you are setting yourself up for trouble when you go to run this if you haven't taken the time to put it down on paper to begin with. Plus, you're not giving yourself a foundation of anything to build off of. The action of writing this stuff out makes a world of difference, and it's something that I see so many people trying to skip because it takes time. I implore you, take the time, write it out. You will notice the difference. All right. PSA over. Okay, so let's see. So we've given ourselves a little bit of information here. Now, I might take a moment to just kind of outline the particulars of the adventure here, just so that they're kind of all laid out in terms of who wants what and what is expected from the beginning here, as well as what's the reward. That's something that I like to make very obvious for myself because I have a bad habit of getting the end of the adventure going, ooh, what were they supposed to, what were the characters supposed to get at the end of this? So let's see here. So the characters are to seek out uh, TK Glacial Mine, recover cold iron. Let's see. So that would mean that they need to find the mine. Let's see here. Does the let's see here, TK community leaders got to give them a lead, or else they've got nothing to go off of. Community leader offers TK lead as to the mine's location. TK community leader offers TK reward for service. If he offers any aid, we might put that on here too. We might put a space for that. Community leader offers TK aid. You know, and there's a lot of stuff on here that we don't know, but we got a placeholder to kind of think about these things as we go through. One thing in particular that will affect the immediate sort of progression of this is our community leader, whether or not he knows the mine's location. Because that will determine whether finding the mine, getting the mine is our setback or whether it is our puzzle. So there's a lot of schools of thought on this. And frankly, you should just go with whatever sounds good to you. If you've got more ideas for a wilderness kind of adventure for this, where they've got to spend time out there searching up details and finding clues, then great. Yeah, then they've got to find the mine's location. If you don't, well, then the community leader knows the mine's location. Maybe they pulled it out of old records. Maybe there's a historical account of it, and people have just never been back because of this disease. For this adventure, I kind of like the idea of this community leader knows where to find this stuff. They've just never sent anybody to go find it because of, well, how dangerous this disease is. Ooh, which reminds me. TK, community leader, warns of plague in mine. Offers outline of mine's useful history. Cool. All information I'm going to want to build out here. You know, what happened to the mine, but only what's useful there. So this gives me some information to start with here. So now I'm going to end up jumping back over here, and I've got a few things I know I'm going to need to flesh out in the future. So for example, we have our starting community, and we know that this is going to be a settlement. We know we have our glacial mine, and we know that this is going to be a dungeon. Those are going to be places that we're going to have to flesh out and build. I will put them over here for now. They may end up getting built in the body of this text. Specifically, the glacial mine might get outlined in the body of our adventure here. And so, you know, if I fill it out here, then I'll just copy and paste what's here over there. If I fill it out there, I'll copy and paste what's down here. It really doesn't matter. It's really up to you in terms of you know, where you prefer to work and how you kind of flow through this. It's a beautiful thing about copy and paste. All right, so we don't need a place for the reward. We'll put that in here somewhere. We've already kind of got our plague here. We're going to tag that as homebrew for the moment. We may decide to use one of the diseases in the Dungeon Master's Guide or something like that to make it easier on ourselves. But we'll give that our own. We'll end up giving that our own flavor. And if that becomes the case, we'll tag that as a reskin or something along those lines. The aid here is a question mark. I like the I frequently put a place in here for our patron, our quest giver, to offer some kind of aid to our adventurers. Whether I end up using that or not, I like to put that placeholder in, because if I get later on in this adventure and I go, they need X, Y, or Z to get through this particular evolution. Well, then it gives me a place to kind of go back and say, the community leader gave them this key that they need to get into this one room. Or, the community leader gave them the healing potions they're going to need to get through this brutal battle at the end, or something along those lines. It's ironically really rewarding for players when you give them something at the beginning. They spend a lot of time not using that information or not using that item, and then they finally at a critical moment realize that they have the thing that's going to turn the tide for them. It's been in their pack the whole time. In fiction, we call that the Q factor. It's that, back to the whole Bond movie. It's kind of to a Bond movie reference where at the beginning of the movie, Bond gets all these cool gadgets, and then at a crucial moment, one of them becomes useful. It's the same kind of deal here, and players really like that. It feels very it feels like good storytelling to them, and it kind of gives them that moment of snatching defeat, or snatching victory from the jaws of defeat. So we'll leave a place in that for there. Okay, so we've kind of got our bones here, stuff that we're gonna have to figure out as we move forward. But we've got the entry set here. So let's jump to our climax. Let's get some information here. Let's give this a heading, and we'll say preparing for the final encounter. For the final countdown. Can't sing. Sorry about that. Anyway, so the players are going to come out of, based on what we've kind of thought through already, we know that the players are going to come out, or the characters are going to come out of this glacial mine with their MacGuffin in hand. They're returning home with the elixir, as we'd say in the hero's journey. And when they get there, there's a twist. The town is excited to have it. They're going to pay that reward, but they're not preparing. They're not preparing for a fight. They're preparing to supplicate these this coven. And so we need to put in some information on that particular encounter for us here. So let's start with what we know. So the characters return to TK community, and with cold iron, turn it over to TK community leader, who thanks and pays them. Great. With the job finished, the characters begin to suspect the cold iron is not will not be used to oppose the hags, but will be gifted to them. Okay. So this is where we're getting to a place where we've got to start connecting some of the dots that we know. They have the MacGuffin, they turn it over, they give it to the community leader. The community leader's not been honest with them to this point. There's a secret here. And so we're going to have to come up with ways that the characters might start to figure that out. And so we can flush out how they find those as we go. But I will frequently, for this kind of thing, come over and make a heading, and I'll say a clue list. And I'll just start putting clues on here. There's a couple different methodologies for how to do clues. And if we were doing a murder mystery or a campaign or an adventure that really was mystery focused, we'd use a more robust system for littering clues. Here, for now, we're going to kind of just keep a place of things that the players could notice, and we'll fill that out as we go in terms of what they notice automatically and what they need skill checks to notice and what they might infer from this sort of thing. Um, but one thing where we might start with here, just to kind of get our ball rolling, is um, the characters notice that no battle preparations are being made about town. I might even say that indeed indeed it appears they or I should say indeed it looks more like they are setting up for a ceremony of some kind. So we give a little strange facet there. Not what the players would expect. You're just kind of giving yourselves these little clues here, and then you can use them to sort of nudge your players into drawing conclusions. And we'll fill some of these out more as we go, but we've got our space here for it. And so that means that now our players need to make a discovery. Making the discovery. Let's see here. And so now we know that our characters will have figured out what's going on here, what's really going on here. So characters let's say now that the characters know that the town plans to hand over this dangerous magical material to the hags, they must decide what they will do about it. You're going to have a number of these decision points as you write this. This is one of the major differences in writing an RPG versus writing a story, is that your players have agency throughout this, right? They're going to make choices as they move through this adventure. And we need to write the adventure in such a way that we account for those choices. That's what keeps this thing from being railroady, because railroading in a campaign is not about having nothing set up or only doing a sandbox adventure and letting characters kind of wander where they will. Railroading is about saying that there is one solution to every decision point. There's only one viable outcome. And that's what we want to avoid. We can know that our players are going to have to come to certain moments. For example, in any adventure, there must be a climax, because the climax is by definition the moment when the story objective, the adventure's objective, is decided. Will the players, get their cold iron, or well, in this case, they think that's their objective. There's a different objective, but will the characters win or lose? Right? Will they defeat the hags or will they not? They have to have this moment in the adventure, or the adventure just never ends. It never finds a conclusion. Right? So it's about giving player agency, is about letting them find their own path to that point while hitting the necessary wickets on the way. And so we're going to make a decision point here. So they have to decide what they're going to do about it, which means that we've got to account for a couple things. They may, let's see here, the players may choose to fight hags on their own. TBD. We'll fill that out later. And then they may choose to rouse the town against the hags. TBD. And then finally, They may choose to simply walk away. You're, it is entirely possible that your characters will decide that, you know what, they did their part, they got their money, the rest of this isn't their problem. It's time to get out. And that's a viable option. We need to be prepared for that at this juncture. They may just decide not to engage willingly. And that doesn't mean the story has to end there, right? Because again, our villain has agency as well. They're going to take their own actions. But we know we have our kind of our our three options here, the three things that could happen at this point. And so what we do later in the adventure is later as we write this out is we'll write out what happens at these different decision points. And we'll come back to that as we kind of flesh this out and as we've got some time to think about that. The toughest one is going to be what happens if they simply walk away. We're going to have to come up with a reason for the hags to not allow the characters to just wash their hands of this. And that will extend this. That may grow into its own thing, and we can deal with that as we do this. But it's something to keep in the back of our mind as we build out the rest of this. All right. So now we are going to say that in most outcomes here, there is the confrontation with the Bloodgood Sisters. So that's worth its own box here, and we'll fill that out more once we've kind of fleshed this out. We've got an idea of what's brought the characters to this point and what resources they have, what resources our Bloodgood Sisters have to oppose them. Cool. So we've got some pieces of this put together that we can jump back to as needed. All right. And so now we can start looking at some of the other parts of this. We know what their mission is going to be setting out. We know what the climax is going to be, where we're going to end up. Now let's start filling in some of the places through here, through our middle. Like I said, I think that for this adventure, we're going to make the dungeon itself a puzzle. It's, is the puzzle room of this. This is where they've got to think through their actions and their connections and find what they're looking for, because it probably isn't obvious from the get-go where this cold iron material would be inside here. So let's start with that. So let's open up our puzzle, and here we're writing, our, if you will, our prototypical dungeon. Right now, you may have the urge when you're writing a dungeon to go, well, we should start with the map, because how do I know what rooms to fill out if I don't already have the map, if I don't know what the dungeon looks like? And I would say that the map actually comes in the middle, where we're going to start fleshing out things that we know need to be in this space. And once we kind of have the things that we know that need to be in this particular dungeon kind of built out narratively, then we'll sit down and we'll draw the map. And then the map will have those rooms in it. We'll probably also have a few other spaces that become interesting as we draw this. And then we'll come back to this and we'll fill out those other spaces. So I like to do my maps smack dab in the middle of this process. So that means we're going to start by imagining what would be in a glacial mine. So let's go ahead and rename this, because puzzle doesn't really help us here imagining this. Let's say glacial mine. And it's going to need a name. We're going to have to come up with something for that, but we'll come back to that. We can always lean on fantasy name generators if we need to. But for the moment, let's just kind of fill out some contextual elements. Let's think about what this place would be like. So I always start my dungeons, my wildernesses, my adventure locations, if you will, with the same heading. I start with general features. All right. And the general features are thematic elements that encompass the whole area here. It's going to be a mix of mechanics and sensory devices, things to just kind of give me the flavor, if you will, of this place. It'll make it easier to kind of write this as we go. And so I'll make a little note to myself because I'm a little OCD about this, that the following are, let's see, the following features are true throughout, or we should say present throughout the dungeon. Helps if I spell it right. Dungeon. Unless otherwise stated by the text. Cool. Sweet. Now that I've got that particular urge off my back, we can move forward. So we'll do some subheadings for this, but there are key things that particularly in a dungeon you're going to hit all the time. So things like lighting, how lit or unlit is it here? Things like doors and secret doors, because what is a dungeon without a secret door or two? In this context, we might say something like atmosphere, because we've kind of got this plague, and so there might be some poison gas, if you will, some infectious material in here in the air. So there might be patches where you can still get infected. We can think about that. Put that in here. We're definitely going to, let's put a subheading here. Let's say the plague and infection. TBD. Cool. Yeah, and if this was a wilderness, I would describe this. We'd say an element here that was like, and the weather. Kind of what the general weather is like in this area here. But it's not. But we do have some question of temperature. This is inside a glacier. So let's say extreme cold, TBD. We could put that on there. So as I kind of think through this, we'll put some notes down. So for example, it's the most obvious one's extreme cold. Let's start here. This mine was built into the wall, or we should say it was dug into the wall of a glacier, and is made almost entirely of ice. Temperatures are near freezing at all times. Subjecting the characters to extreme cold as outlined in the Dungeon Master's Guide. I'll be honest, I usually just abbreviate that, DMG. And then I will do kind of two things for this. If I am going to be printing this out, or if I'm going to be playing in paper someplace I don't have internet access, I'll make a note to myself that's like, chapter, what is that? Chapter 6, chapter 5, something along the lines. Let's find out. Chapter 5, look at that. Chapter 5, Wilderness Survival, I believe, is where we have extreme cold. Cool. Yeah, so I will take that hyperlink, just save time, copy and paste that. Nice thing about D&D Beyond is you have these little link markers here, so you can get the exact hyperlink you're looking for. But if I'm going to do this, in some place I don't have internet, I'm going to do this on paper later on. I'd say, chapter 5, Wilderness Survival. Just to give myself a quick reference to find this. When invariably we sit on the plan, I go, what was the DC for that again? What do they need? That kind of deal. But since I may be doing this online, I would also come over to this and highlight and link and put that right there, because now when I go to play this, I can just click on that and it's going to open up that extreme cold section right there for me. Makes it nice and easy. So I do that with all kinds of things that require special rules, especially with monster stat blocks. Super useful. Okay, cool. So we got that little detail there. It is cold, 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 cold inside the glacier. Now, uh, another thing that kind of jumps out at me on this, as we're kind of flowing through this, is that glaciers are not they're not opaque, right? It's ice for the most part. And yes, at a certain thickness, you can't see outside. But if you look at pictures of people who are walking through glacial caves and stuff like that, one, you just get a lot of bouncing of the light of their own lights, and two, places where the ice is thinner, you may get some penetration, some filtration of ambient light in there. So we might have spaces in this that kind of glow on their own. Um, One really fun storytelling thing to do is when you're writing a place that is dark and gloomy and ominous, like, a mine full of a deadly disease. Um, Adding these little moments of brightness and levity in places, it does two things. One, it creates something unexpected. So the players are not going to be expecting for their characters to run into nice things anywhere in this adventure. Everything they're going to be suspect of everything because most of the adventures they've played have required them to be suspect of everything. But so it adds that little bit of surprise, but it also gives them an emotional relief from the tension. So if we've had a gritty time up until this point, then they come into an icy cathedral that is just beautiful and bright and majestic. It gives them this moment of emotional relief. And that means that later on, when things get tense again, they'll begin to feel that. They won't get burnt out on that tension. The When things get gritty again and they get tough again, that'll create that emotion in your players, that excitement, that sense of suspense that keeps them wanting to move forward without them ever getting quite used to that, without them ever getting burnt out on it. So giving yourself some places to have a little lightness in in a dark in the dark is useful, and vice versa. If you're writing a very light campaign, having a few dark moments helps break things up a bit. So lighting, let's see here. The walls of the mine are pure ancient ice, though we'll say artificial light sources bounce and reflect. We'll just say reflect because I'm just repeating myself there. Reflect off the walls. Reflect off the walls. This means that even dim light counts as bright light up to half its radius. It's radius. We'll say something like that. Don't worry too much about mechanics here. We'll go back and massage all of this. My mantra for all this is that story supersedes mechanics all the time. The story is the most important bit. That's what your players play for. The mechanics just help tell that story. And so, where a mechanic is helpful, use it. Where it is not, hand wave it, ignore it, move on. Put in a filler text here. So I'm going to say we're going to make a little guess here that reflection adds a little extra brightness there, and we'll come back and massage that later. But we'll put a thought in here as we. Most of the walls are too thick to allow ambient light to penetrate. Some areas are close enough that the sun's rays filter through, creating let's see, you're creating natural caverns. I would say creating natural rainbows. Let's do that. Natural rainbows in some of the larger caverns. Again, we'll come back and massage that as we get to particular areas, but it gives us a little bit of flavor in here in some spots. As the light kind of segments through the natural prism of the ice, we get these rainbows. Doors and secret doors, not necessarily to start with here. We'll kind of fill those out as we go. Um, Unless there's a reason for doors to be locked, I usually say that they're open. Um, you know, Nobody operating in anything um, frequently locks all the rooms unless it's a high security facility kind of deal. You're not locking rooms that you need to access all the time. Now this place is abandoned, and that actually brings up another point. Thinking about the idea of this, was a working mind, and they hit this disease, and now everybody kind of scattered, right? Everybody's rushing out to save themselves so they don't get infected. Um, Kind of brings up back to this Bond reference we've made a couple times tonight, or today rather. Um, I think of, if you've ever seen the movie Skyfall, there's that moment where Bond goes to that island that Silva is effectively stolen. Convinced everybody there was a leak at the chemical plant. They all abandon it. You see that it's like a ghost town. It literally is this sort of place where people are living there one moment, they just picked up and they left. This kind of place where we have this infection, this immediate lethal danger in this mine, I imagine it would be something very kind of similar to that, where we'd have a lot of elements of this, where it's almost still life. It's almost the echoes of the people that were living there. And so I might put down here as a little bit of flavor under plague and infection. Let's see here. The plague popped up suddenly and forced inhabitants to abandon all their worldly goods to escape with their lives. The result is ghostly rooms that look as if the occupants only just stepped outside. And we get more of that here with the preservation that would come with from the cold of the space. Cool. So, so we're getting close to the end of our time here. So before we dig into any more of this, this is exactly kind of how I work through, where we start with what we know and we build through from there. And if I'm writing something that I know and it doesn't trigger another thought, well, then we move on. We go to the next step. We go to the next thing that we know until we find something that does spark some more ideation. And the trick to that, if you're ever getting stuck, is to play with it. All right, don't get locked into the I must produce a dungeon, I must produce an adventure for my party to play, or else we're not going to have anything to play, and the session will be terrible, and oh my goodness, what will I ever do? My players will hate me, then I'll ever want to come back. Feeding into that doom loop doesn't help you. Instead, sit down and play with a few ideas. Write them out, talk to yourself. I do a lot of talking to myself when I write this kind of thing, because the more that you voice this, the more that you hear it, the more that you see it on paper, the more of your brain you're getting involved in this process. The more you play with it, you don't judge your ideas, but you just say, ooh, this would be cool. Ooh, that would be cool. Or, ooh, what about this? And you let yourself kind of follow those tangents. They will lead you to really engaging, enjoyable things. Then you find the one that feels really good, and you put that down and you say, okay, this is our pin, and unless there's a good reason to change this, this is what we're going to work with here. And just work through the process like that, jumping back and forth as you need to. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. We will pick up again next week from where we left off here, and we'll continue on writing our adventure. We'll talk more about building out locations and building out some of the special mechanics. So, for example, this plague, we'll probably have to tackle that relatively soon in this process. So if you've been enjoying these videos, please subscribe, like this video, share it with people you know so we can get that out there. Everything you do for that helps me grow the channel, helps me do more of these. And actually, if you're interested in seeing an adventure that I wrote using this system, I have a new adventure called Plague Breakers going up on on the DMs Guild. That'll be dropping tomorrow. So that's going to be March 10th, 2024. It's free, so check it out if you like it. If you don't, awesome. Either way, thank you so much for being here, and I look